In this video, we're going to look at some more techniques for creating tilable textures. Uh, this time we'll look at some examples like this stone texture that I have here. I simply took a photograph using my camera of some stone that I found interesting and that I thought would make a great texture. So we'll look at how we can take this image of stone and make it into an effective tilable texture that we can apply to our 3D models. The first thing I might do before I do anything else is I might play around a little bit with the levels of this stone here. So I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments, Levels, and I'll simply play around a little bit with the levels and see if I can make it feel a little bit more rich. If I uncheck the preview, we can compare it to the original, and I think I'm liking that. I think it feels a little bit richer than the original photograph. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. Now you remember from the previous video that I said that typically textures that you use in 3D are dimensions of 256 by 256 or 512 by 512, 1024 by 1024, 2048 by 2048. So I'm going to go ahead and create a brand new Photoshop document that is 2048 by 2048 pixels. And then I think I'll take the stone. I just tore it off the tab. I just tore it off here like that so that I can easily drag it into my new document. I can go ahead and drag this back if I want, and then switch over to my document here. And you can see that I can move this. It's quite a large image, and I'm only getting a little bit of it in my texture space here because it was a very large photograph. So I'm going to take this layer here and I'll go to Edit, Transform, Scale, and I'll just scale it down a little so that maybe we can get a little bit more of my stone texture that I took. I'll look for the area that I think is the nicest, and I think this is probably good here, and I will press Enter to complete that scaling. The next thing I'm going to do is crop it, because in fact you can see I could still move this around. It still has these areas that are off of my workspace here. So I will click on the crop button here, and I will press Enter. You can see what it's going to cut out. I don't need these areas, so I'll go ahead and complete that operation. And now if I were to move this layer, you'll see that the rest of that texture area doesn't exist anymore. So what I'm going to do now is offset it, just like we did in the previous video. So remember that this image is 2048 by 2048, and I will go to Filter, Other, Offset, and I'm going to set the horizontal offset to 1024 by 1024 for the vertical. And what you'll notice is that we have some seams going right down the middle, very obvious seams. And if we were to use this as a texture, we're going to see those seams. So we need to get rid of them so that this will become a tilable texture. Now, the tool that I'm going to use to get rid of these seams is found here. This is the clone stamp. Now remember that with any of these tools, if you hold down the mouse on it, you may see that there are a couple other tools here as well. We also have this pattern stamp tool. We want to use the clone stamp tool. Now, just like your brushes, you can increase the size of your clone stamp. I'm going to increase it. You can either increase it here, just like a regular brush. You can also adjust the hardness and softness of it. For something like this, it's better to use a soft edged brush. And then what you do is you select a part on your image that you want to clone. I'm going to pick this area right here first, right here. And to do so, I press down the Alt key on my keyboard. You'll notice that my cursor has changed, and then I click with my left mouse button. So I've just selected that area to clone, and then if I come over here, I can paint away this seam here. So I'll use my left mouse button and I'll just start kind of painting away the seam. Till I get to, you can see here I get to the bottom and you can see that new edge there. But that just means I need to clone a different area. Maybe I'll clone this area here. So I'll press Alt on my keyboard. Actually, I won't clone that area because remember I'm continuing here, so I'm going to clone up here. So I'll press Alt, click my left mouse button, and continue painting. Again, I'm getting close to that edge there, right here, so maybe I'll clone another area. Could be anywhere, really. I'll clone here. And that's pretty good. Now I've gotten rid of that edge here. Although this area looks a little funny, so maybe I'll just clone another area and just paint that away a little bit. Now I need to get rid of this seam here. Once again, I'll clone an area. Perhaps I'll start here. Come over here and start painting away that seam. Getting close to the edge, so I'll clone another area. And if there are any areas on here I don't like, I'll just work on them a little bit. But I think that should be pretty good. I now have a tilable texture. Now remember that the easiest way to test whether you've done a successful job at creating your tilable texture is to simply offset it again. So I'll go once again to Filter, Other, Offset. Because I said it's 1024 by 1024, it actually put it back into its original position. But again, I might just kind of play around with these numbers and move them around a little bit and just see if at any point I see a seam. And because it's seamless, it really doesn't matter where we go with this at this point. Any of these should be good. So I'll go ahead and just say, okay, I'm not seeing a seam, so I think that this tilable texture should work fine. I'll say okay, and it should be good. I'll go ahead and save it. Now, it's certainly not necessary to test your textures in Maya or some other 3D package, but if you know how to, it's not a bad idea. So I'm going to go ahead and try out that texture that I just created by going to my Hypershade. I'll create a new material for it, and I will, in the color channel, select select the texture that I just created. Here it is. And go ahead and apply it. Here it is. It's not being tiled right now, but if I go to the Place 2D Texture node on the material, I can go ahead and repeat it. I'll repeat it 2 times on both the U and the V, and as you can see, there's no visible visible seam here, so it is tiling successfully. One thing you will notice, of course, with tileable textures is that the more you tile it, the more obvious it becomes because you start to see patterns. And this is pretty much unavoidable unless you're using something like in a game engine where you can start layering various tileable textures on top of one another, and then it becomes less obvious. But remember that oftentimes with these tileable textures, you're actually much closer to them, and when you're closer to it, you're less likely to notice the repeating patterns. This time we'll take a look at a slightly more difficult example here, and it'll be this stone wall. Now, one of the things I really enjoy about creating textures is that I can just go out into my neighborhood, my environment, where I live, and take pictures of things that I think are interesting and would make great textures. And in this case, it's a stone wall near my house. So I have this stone wall. Again, I might come over here to Image, Adjustment, and just play around a little bit with the levels and see if I can get it a little bit, maybe a little richer. And then I would get started. So here's my image. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new document. It will be 2048 by 2048 pixels. And so I have this new Photoshop document, and I have the photograph that I took. And what I want to first demonstrate is how we can use the clone stamp between 2 images. If you remember in the previous example, we actually we cloned an area within the document that we were working in. However, you can also clone an area in a separate document and then apply it to the document that you're currently working on. So what I want you to notice is perhaps, let's say, this stone right here. I'm going to select my clone stamp, and I'm just going to clone it right perhaps in the middle. Make my brush a little smaller. And I'll start painting in here. And what I want you to notice is, well, there's the stone. And I've just cloned it from a separate document and am applying it to this document that I'm currently working in. In fact, if I were to continue painting in here, it would continue with more of the original image there. Now I'm going to undo that, and in fact I forgot to create an extra layer. I'd say create a layer here so that you're not working on your background layer. That's my personal preference. One thing you'll notice is that actually that rock is quite large. That's because this is a very large image here. So what I might do is make this image smaller. Let's go ahead and do that. Remember that this texture here is 2048 by 2048, so perhaps I'll take this document and resize it. I'll make its height 2048. Notice that because this is selected here, it has applied the proper width to keep the same ratio of this original document. So I'll say OK. I think what I'll do is select, using my marquee selection tool, my whole image here, and I will hit Control-C to copy it. Come over to my new document here and Control-V. You'll notice it just created a layer with that image on it. We still have the whole image there, and it goes off the borders there, so I'll just kind of place it perhaps where I want it. This could be good. And I'll go ahead and crop it. You'll notice that it's going to cut out some of those areas there, but that's okay. And here's the beginning of our Tilable texture. Let's go ahead and offset it now and see what the challenge is going to be. So I'll go to Filter, Other, Offset. You can see the seam here and here because currently it's set to horizontal of 2,671 pixels by vertical 1,478. So it goes right down the middle, not that it really matters. I'm going to go ahead and set this to 1024 by 1024 and say OK. This is the area that we need to use our clone stamp on to eliminate the seams. And it'll be a little bit more challenging because now we're dealing with something where we can't just paint away these, we have to do it a little bit more deliberately. So this is a lot more challenging than the previous example. But I'll show you how I might tackle this. So one thing I might do is take a look at some of these rocks. Like I might look at this rock here and then look for its look for the same rock in this image. And if I look at this image, I can see that it is this rock here. So what I might do then is clone that rock. I'm going to make my brush a little smaller. And with my clone stamp, I press Alt. I'm going to click on specifically that corner right there. And then I'll return to this image and I'll start, you can see, you can fit it there perfectly. And I'll just start painting that rock in there. Just like that. And you can see that I've eliminated the seam right there. In fact, I could continue painting in here. And you can see that we've already gone a long way to eliminate the seam. Let's try another area. I'll take a look at another rock. Maybe this time I would like to try perhaps this rock here. I'll go back to the original image and locate it. Let's see. Okay. I can see it. It's right here. I'll go ahead and clone it. Perhaps this top peak of it. Pressing Alt, left click, return, and match it up and start painting. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and just continue working on this, and we'll just speed up the video. Okay, so I spent a little time working on this. Let's take a look at it. I'm going to take a look at just this image here. One thing you may have noticed as you were watching me work on it is that I couldn't just copy rocks over from my other image. Sometimes I had to be a little creative um, with cloning certain areas and using them to kind of fill in and create new areas. But here's what I have now. Let's go ahead and test it out really quickly by offsetting it. We can offset it back to its original, or we could try any other uh, number here. It doesn't really matter. And as long as we can't visibly see a seam in here anywhere, then it should be good. So I think it's looking pretty good. There might be a couple areas that maybe I'd want to work a little bit more on, but I think that for now I'm going to say that I'm happy with it. Some of the areas that I think maybe look a little strange and would be easy to fix would be this little crack here in this rock. In fact, what I could do with that, if I wanted to fix it really quickly, is just clone another area. Let's check that out. I'll just fix that real quick by cloning any area on any of these rocks. It could be here, for instance. Just clone that and maybe kind of paint that away. You can see that you can quickly and easily fix those little areas like that. Nothing too difficult. But anyway, I think this is looking pretty good. Maybe I don't like this crack here as well. I don't know. Let's go ahead and clone another area maybe on this rock here and start painting away that little weird looking crack there. And perhaps I like that a little bit more. Anyway, I'm going to say that this is good, and I'm going to go ahead and save it and test it out. So here we are back in Maya. I'm going to go to my Hypershade and create a new material. And I will select that new texture that I just created. And here it is, applied to my polygon plane. Let's go ahead and try tiling it. Try tiling it 3 and 3. And as you can see, it does tile. And there are no visible seams. But as you saw in the previous example, you do start to see patterns, but that is okay. For instance, you can see this rock repeats here and here and here and so on. But it is a tileable texture, and if you are right next to it, it won't be so obvious that it is tiling. This is very, very valuable for environments in both Maya as well as in game engines. So that's a little bit about creating tileable textures in Photoshop, which you can apply to your models in Maya or other 3D packages. I think it's very valuable to test out your textures before finishing them. One thing I would like to note is that I think that this texture works. However, you should look at it and see if anything jumps out at you. Now, you're not going to be able to eliminate all the different types of, the repetition that can become obvious, like these stones that I pointed out earlier. But this line here kind of jumps out at me. And I actually went back into Photoshop to see if I could spend just a few moments trying to resolve that. So here's what I did. I created a new texture, simply reworking it just ever so slightly, and I'm going to apply it on here now. And you'll see that I broke up that kind of obvious line. It wasn't a seam, but it was this obvious line going through the texture that when it repeats becomes very, very obvious. So I think that that is an improvement on it. Again, to compare the two, here's the original, and this line right here really jumped out at me. So I simply painted in this rock to kind of break that strong horizontal line there. And I think that that makes this texture a little bit more successful as a tileable texture. Anyway, I hope that this video has been interesting for you and helpful, and thank you for watching.